Have you ever played the Would You game? By Redditor Let's Split Up. Would you cut off your pinky to get $1 million? Would you kill your cheating spouse to marry the man of your dreams? Would you eat a dog turd to win a year's supply of ice cream? These are the sorts of preposterous questions that make up the Would You game, which is like a deranged cousin of the Would You Rather board game. But unlike the popular board game, the Would You game is real-world stakes. Stakes as high as life or death. Or even higher. I found this out the hard way with my sister, Seti. Her actual name is September, but everyone calls her Seti, just like everyone calls me Toby. Seti was always competitive, even when she was very little. But I didn't understand how competitive until she invented the Would You game. We played during boring summers at home. In the beginning, it was just Seti, me, our older sister Jules, and her best friend, Darren. Darren is the one who added cards to the game. Structure. He was kind of a nerd and liked board games, though he only reluctantly played them with me and Seti, whom he found too young and competitive. The game as it exists today is largely Darren's construction. There are 7 cards, always dealt in order. Would you too? For example, would you too? Most of the time, the randomness of the cards led to absurd sentences, less like truth or dare and more like Mad Libs. Points were earned through guesses, with fellow players trying to guess whether you would or would not. Often the fun of the game revolved around players justifying their choices, as in sure, eating a dog turd would be gross, but 2 minutes of gross is worth a full year of delish. It was silly. Harmless fun. The fact the game turned into something horrifying is my fault. I knew even at the time I shouldn't have done what I did. But I was furious with Seti. She'd pulled, would you lick a cockroach to get a day home from school, and she'd said yes. Seti says yes to everything, I pointed out. It's ridiculous. She's lying. She wouldn't do any of these things. I would. Seti, about 7 years old at the time, balled her fists. She was trying very hard to be cool enough to play with her older siblings and keep up with us. You wouldn't, I snapped, sick of her lying. We went back and forth, and finally I declared I was adding a new rule. The challenge rule. Any player could challenge another player, and then the challenged player would have to do the thing they'd said yes to. If they did, the player who'd made the challenge had to give the reward. A day home from school meant I'd cover for her with our parents. Seti's face immediately took on a pink cast. She clearly hadn't anticipated my making up this rule. I, cruel older sibling that I was, challenged her then to lick the cockroach. It wasn't nice, I admit. Tears came into her eyes. She looked at me in disbelief. Seti always looked up to me, idolized me. I'd like to say that in the moment, I regretted what I was doing to her. But at the time, I was just gloating. But little Seti wouldn't be beaten either. Darren went and got a roach. He pulled a dead one from one of the traps and laid it out on a napkin in front of her. Seti's lower lip quivered. Her big eyes lifted to mine. Then she leaned forward, squinching her eyes, and stuck her tongue out. The pink tip touched the roach. She licked it, declared Darren, delighted, even as Julie cried, "Ew," and I exclaimed, "Gross." But now I owed her a day off school. Triumphant, she squished the dead roach in the napkin and tossed it into the trash. "I win," she said. "Yeah, well, you licked a roach, which means you lose at life," I retorted. "I win," she declared again. From then on, the challenge rule held. But I should have known it was a stupid, dangerous rule to put into play. The next time we played, the very first card Seti flipped had "kill" written on it. She paused on that card, while Darren's mouth made an O of suspense, and Jules and I exchanged troubled glances. Including the kill card was controversial. It sometimes resulted in hilariously absurd combinations, such as would you kill your but to become a lost treasure. To an adult, this sort of Mad Libs game is ridiculous. When I was 10 it was hilarious. But of course, the word could also result in some very bad combinations. Seti kept drawing, your sibling. To win this game. She paused, mouth quirking to the side as she considered the cards. Invalid, declared Jules. No, no, no. We can still guess, said Darren, even as Seti slid her answer card face down in front of her. Darren, Jules objected, but Darren was already sliding his card forward as well. Jules and I followed suit, and we all flipped them upright. Darren and Jules had guessed no. My card said yes. I knew my dumb sister. And Seti, hers also said yes. Knew it, I said, glaring quietly. She smiled back at me serenely. Come on, bullshit, Darren said, while Jules elbowed him. But Darren ignored her and growled, challenge. No, said Jules. Oh, no. No, we're not. What? Darren snapped. It's in the rules. If she kills Toby, she wins the game. He eyed Seti and said pointedly, I'm not going to let her win by cheating. Or bluffing. Enough, said Jules. My younger sister gathered the cards in front of her, set both her yes and no cards aside, and smoothed her skirt. There was no red face this time. No crying or embarrassment. She stood up, turned to Darren and said, Well, aren't you silly? Don't you know it's just a game? Come on, Toby. Let's go. Something in my stomach nodded as her fingers intertwined mine. It was a relief to know that despite her competitiveness, my sister could recognize when a thing went too far. Suddenly her arm curved round my neck, yanking me back in a choke hold. I slapped at her arms. Fingers clawed and pulled at me as my face went purple and my windpipe felt crushed and speckles blackened my vision. Then she was off me, hauled back by Darren and Jules as she howled, Let me go! Let go! Seti, stop it, hollered Jules. Seti was still screeching as they dragged her to her room. Jesus. She's bat's hit, growled Darren. Jules declared no more games. If I kill Toby tonight, I win, panted Seti as they locked her in. I win. Say that I win. No one wins, Seti, screamed Jules. I can't believe I even have to say this. I'm telling Mom and Dad. Why do you have to be so crazy? Christ. The game is suspended, do you understand me? It's over, there are no winners. And we are never playing this fucking game ever again. So that was the end of the Would You game for many years. Seti found other games to play, of course. Less dangerous ones. She was really good at games, and made a fortune with gambling, the lottery, card tournaments, investing. Playing the market was itself a sort of game, she told me, and as with all such ventures, she tackled it with a competitive spirit and almost unmatched skill, though she did suffer some stunning losses occasionally, as a consequence of her tremendous risks. She knew all the tricks of the trade, shuffling tricks, sleight of hand, weighted dice, counting cards. Contrary to what you might believe, she was actually a pretty good sister, most of the time. It was Seti who took care of our parents, making sure their bills were paid and their lawn mowed and the big house always tidy. She did a lot of the cooking and cleaning herself, before she'd do her makeup and go out for the evening to the casino, or for a drink with business partners. She never went to college, instead keeping house for our parents, but then, she didn't really need college. We had wealth inherited from our grandparents, and Seti multiplied it neatly, managing investments for all of us. She did this with complete transparency and fairness. And while she sometimes gambled heavily with her own money, she never did with ours, always putting it in investments according to our willingness to embrace risk or security. And yet, through my college years, she brought back the Would You game. And this time, being legally an adult, she had no one to rein her in. I found out about it from Kedar, another boy at her school. He told me how she'd started playing with a group of preppy senior friends. I tried to shrug this off. Whatever. We were all adults now. Surely my sister wouldn't go too crazy, right? It wasn't until later I found out she'd changed the rules again. She and some of the other seniors were playing one day when they decided that the Mad Libs aspect was no longer as entertaining as when we were children, and that players should draw until the cards issued a sentence that the majority agreed made sense. Of course, even then, most of the results were still things that couldn't actually happen. But others, like would you eat bugs to get a winning lotto ticket, were not only perfectly valid combinations, but also easy enough to both challenge and reward. And this is exactly what happened when Seti and her friends played. One of them claimed he'd eat bugs to get a winning lotto ticket. She challenged. He ate several ants, so Seti bought lotto tickets until she had a winning one. Granted, it was only for $3, but the cards hadn't specified, had they? And that's how it began, Seti herself becoming a guarantor, of sorts, anytime she played the game. She had the money, after all. Even back then, our family was well off, and Seti already had a considerable sum saved from her gambling and side hustles. I never knew what else she did on the side. But I assume some of it wasn't legal. She could afford to escalate the game. So when a combination came up like would you dump your boyfriend to earn a new iPhone, Seti could issue the challenge. And when her friend followed through on the dumping, said friend would be gifted with a new phone. It was nonsense. Risky and unhealthy. But not, I guess, more than any other kind of gambling. Until it got worse. Several years later, Seti had some friends over. I'd refused to join. I'd sworn to myself never to play this game. Seti seemed to get even more competitive when I was around, so I kept away from the group, watching from across the living room. Turns kept passing round and everyone was laughing, drinking. A few people were smoking, but that wasn't really my business. Mostly it sounded like absurd stuff. Would you kiss Mrs. Whittinger to save a litter of kittens? Groans. Mrs. Whittinger was the principal at Seti's high school, and in games of kiss, marry, kill was universally the kill option. Much discussion ensued about whether a litter of kittens would actually die if the player said no to this, and whether the price was too high. Seti considered the question but intertwined her fingers and explained that since the kittens were in the reward deck, not the risk deck, the game would not put kittens in harm's way. In short, kissing will mean you do a good deed, but not kissing won't make you do a bad one, she declared. Thus if Scott, the player who'd drawn this combination, were to return to their old high school to kiss the loathsome Mrs. Whittinger, a litter of kittens would be rescued. But nothing would happen otherwise. Well yeah, but if I don't kiss her some kittens somewhere might not get rescued, so. Guess I gotta kiss her. Scott grinned at the groans all around. Challenge, said Seti, almost automatically, almost bored. Scott did indeed end up visiting the high school on a made-up errand and kissing the principal on the cheek. She was suitably astonished at this affection from a troublesome alum, but also rather touched. And Seti honored her word and awarded Scott by saving a litter of kittens that still occupies our parents' house, where she has devotedly looked after them. But that's not the reason I'm telling you about this game. See, shortly after Scott's draw, another friend, Rosalinda, drew a combination that elicited quite a stir. Would you cut off your finger to gain $1 million? Gasps and whispers all around. Everyone at that party knew that if it was done, Seti could potentially honor the million. This was into her investing years, she had the financial wherewithal for it, and she had granted other gifts before, but never to such an extravagant amount. The most she'd ever given was a gift for a Bahamas trip. I'd totally do it, said Scott. No way, said another friend. No way I'd do that. But $1 million, said someone else. This one's a hypothetical, right, said another, glancing tentatively to Seti, who just sat back holding her drink with her eyes glimmering and a lazy smile on her face. Yeah, obviously, said Scott. I mean, who's got $1 million to give? Seti might. Yeah, right. Screw it, said Rosalinda, slamming her card down. I'm in. Make your picks, people. Everyone voted. Half said yes, half no. Rosalinda flipped her card. Yes. Everyone glanced at Seti, who stood up quietly, moved to the bar to pour herself another drink, and then poured a glass for Rosalinda, too. A glass of strong stuff. She then moved into the kitchen, where she opened a drawer. I felt my heart rate increase. Moved to follow Seti, in whose fingers glinted silver. She sterilized the knife over a flame, then brought it to Rosalinda, laying it out on a tray with napkins, bandages, a first aid kit. Rosalinda's eyes grew wide as saucers. Shit, whispered Scott, disbelieving. Everyone had gone utterly silent. Appalled. I held my breath. Don't, I thought. Don't. What should I have done? Called the police? Even now, I wonder. No one was forcing Rosalinda to do anything. And yet. Sadie sat back in her cushioned chair, idly swirling the bourbon in her glass before downing it. Her eyes glimmered over a smile as she raised her gaze to Rosalinda and whispered, "Challenge." Everyone was dead still. And then, Rosalinda picked up the knife. I'll spare you the description of the aftermath of that. The "would you" cards had said cut your finger off, but they had said nothing about not sewing it back on. Scott put Rosalinda's finger on ice immediately after she cut it off, to the screams of the other players. There were some accusations that said he was sick. That this all went too far. Then Rosalinda's friends rushed her and her severed finger to the hospital, where it was reattached. And of course, Rosalinda and her friends were somewhat mollified that, shortly afterwards, $1 million was transferred to her bank account. In fact, when word spread, others began seeking out my sister to play. That was when I put my foot down about playing in the house. I said our parents' house couldn't be turned into a gambling den. That I didn't want murders or maiming under their roof, and them to have to deal with cleaning up blood or whatever sick things happened. Sadie agreed to take her games elsewhere. I tried to keep out of her business, but occasionally word leaked. From our parents, or Jules, or mutual acquaintances. And it seemed like both the risks and rewards were getting bigger. But when things really got out of hand, when I finally put my foot down that it had to stop, was the first time someone died. Before COVID, the games had involved physical risk, even maiming, but had never included death. I wasn't present for the lethal draw, and only found out later that the combination pulled was would you become haunted by a terrifying ghost to save your child. This particular game took place over Zoom during the height of the pandemic, among a handful of players who won the chance to play via lottery. As it turned out, one of the players had an eldest daughter on a ventilator. Now you'd think that any combination involving a ghost would be inherently invalid. After all, it's not like SETI can conjure up the supernatural. But apparently the players agreed to accept it as a valid draw, and the devoted father played yes. "Anything for my kids," he said. I viewed the recording of the Zoom later, and after the father played his yes card, Seti's eyes fluttered for several seconds in this strange way, as if she were in a trance. Or listening to something no one else could hear. Then her eyes opened, and she declared, "Challenge." A few days later, the daughter recovered. But it wasn't until said daughter messaged me, begging me to intervene, that I understood how deranged the game had become. The man who answered the door in his bathrobe had eyes red-rimmed from weeping, a week's worth of beard stubbling his gaunt face. Without a word he let me into his house, and as he shuffled away from me, I noticed burn marks on the walls. Not in any obvious pattern, but here and there marring the wallpaper. He pointed to a pile of framed photographs stacked on the sofa. They'd formerly been hung on the walls, I realized, but he'd taken them down because in every single photo, he had been burned out, leaving the rest of his family intact. That was how the wallpaper had been charred. There was also, I noticed, a burn mark in the shape of a handprint on his arm. While the father wearily offered me tea, I picked up one of the photos, the backing and part of the glass damaged from the heat. Is it just the burn marks? Or is other stuff going on? The lights, he whispered as he stirred the tea. The shrieks and banging at night. The handprints. The dreams. And this. He pulled open a drawer full of children's drawings scrawled by his daughter and her siblings, kept from when they were very little. In all the drawings, he had been scratched out, and a blackened figure like a shadow seemed to be looming behind him, its hands on his shoulders. "She's obviously hired someone to come and do all this," I said. "You're probably having nightmares from the stress." No way would I believe that SETI could summon ghost. But I absolutely believed she had the resources to make a man think she had. The defiled children's drawings especially left me chilled. How had she identified which figure in the child's scrawls was him? I offered to stay the night. To confront whoever SETI had hired and chase them off. And I promised I would contact my sister in the morning and put an end to this so-called haunting. The man seemed relieved by my assurances that all the spooky effects were staged. Yet he also requested me not to interfere. He was clearly anxious that if he didn't let things continue, his daughter would fall sick again. I tried to assure him that SETI didn't have that kind of power and couldn't make her relapse, but he insisted I keep out of it. Privately, I decided to speak to SETI anyway. She was overseas, however. The man killed himself before she got back. Hung himself from the staircase, leaving his beloved daughter and her siblings to mourn. I waited in our parents' house for my sister the night she returned. She'd barely gotten off the plane a half-hour earlier, but despite what must have been a wearying flight, she waltzed through the front door in a glitzy suit like she'd stepped out of Vegas. Seeing me, she spread her arms wide in greeting. "How could you?" I snarled. She dropped her arms, though her smile didn't falter. "Toby dear, I didn't. Whatever it is you're upset about, it was the cards." "A ghost, SETI?" "A terrifying ghost," she corrected. "Of course it wasn't a ghost, SETI," I bellowed, shaking with fury. The funeral had been 2 days ago. The only terrifying thing here is you. For hounding a man to death. You drove him to this. It's you who fulfills all the challenges, who delivers the rewards. Admit it. You paid for his daughter to get special treatment. I looked into it. You couldn't guarantee it, but you did everything you could to make sure she'd recover, didn't you? And when she did, you made him suffer. He had to complete the challenge. She pursed her lips, silent for a moment, then finally said, "What if I did? What if you did?" I couldn't believe her. "SETI, you drove a man to his death." "You said that already." She looked bored. "So? I made a man terrified. He chose to kill himself." "Bullshit. You killed him, as much as if you handed him the rope." "Oh, he chose hanging?" "SETI." I paused, and added, low and serious, "You have to stop this." That stilled her. She was silent a moment, eyes shadowed by the brim of her hat, crimson lips pursed. Finally, a curl to her mouth. "Make me." "What?" "Make me stop," she repeated, and languidly took a chair at the coffee table, indicating for me to do the same. I stared in horror as she pulled out a deck. "One game," she declared, eyes glittering. "A duel. You win, I stop and never play again. You can have your wish." "No. Toby. People pay thousands to play with me. You don't know what a deal you're getting. Besides, it's the only way to make me stop." She again indicated the chair. I just stared at her, fists clenched. "Why?" "Because, Toby dear, our mother and father's beloved who can do no wrong, because we never finished our game. Remember when we were little? We started to play, but things went too far. We couldn't end it. I won't be left at a stalemate. Finish the game with me, dearest Toby. Golden child. The one mom and dad always loved best. They love you, too. They love me like the alcoholic loves the bottle, a terrible influence they secretly wish they could obliterate. And it's true. I am terrible. But perfect, good Toby. Win against me, and I will stop." Her eyebrows shot up. Reluctantly, dread building in my gut, I sat down opposite her. I threw out one more feeble argument: we don't have enough players. I won't let anyone else get involved. We don't need other players, she corrected. A duel game is a 2-player version. It has a few extra rules, like the double dare. It's where you take your opponent's challenge and double it. So for instance, if it's would you kill a kitten and I accept, you'd have to kill 2. Great example. How are your cats, by the way? All very well. As it happens, they haven't been drawn into any games. She flashed a wicked smile at me as one of said cats, oblivious to the danger it would be and should SETI draw any cards that involved pets. Came over and rubbed against her leg, purring. She explained the rules of the duel game as she shuffled. It was basically the same as the regular game, but answers were scored differently. 1 point for yes, 1 point for correct guesses, 0 points for NO, 0 points for wrong guesses, 10 points for a completed challenge. If a challenge went unfulfilled, it was an automatic loss. If more than one challenge was fulfilled for the same reward, only the most recent challenge would gain the reward. The game would continue until each player had drawn 10 valid combinations. Getting points for saying yes automatically skews the game in your favor, I observed. It skews the game in favor of playing more boldly, yes, Seti agreed. But, it's still possible for you to win. I glowered. Seti allowed me to draw first. Would you dance with rotting human entrails to earn a dream vacation? Tame, by the current standards of the game. I started to put down my NO card, but then remembered I'd get 0 points for it. Of course, if I put down yes, Seti would manage to make those rotting entrails appear, and I didn't even want to think about whether they'd really be human or not. I sighed and pushed forward yes. Seti also slid a card forward. Both of us flipped. Both of us said yes. 1 point for me, 1 for Seti for guessing correctly. I waited for the inevitable challenge, but she only smiled. You're not going to challenge? I asked. No, because you'll actually do it, and you'll get 10 points, she replied. And obviously, you'll get a dream vacation, too. But I'd rather save my money for more interesting rewards. Seti's turn. She flipped the cards slowly. Would you fly to Stinky Toenails to gain your name on Mars? Invalid, obviously. She drew again. Would you sing loudly to the president to save world peace? Another invalid combination. Seti drew 3 more nonsense sentences before finally coming up with a valid combination. Would you kiss a bowl of diarrhea to get a year's supply of ice cream? Ugh! I said. This is such a dumb game. Seti smiled and pushed a card forward. I rolled my eyes and did the same. We both flipped. Yes. Of course you would, I said, disgusted. You could challenge, she offered. And give you 10 points? Fuck that. We went back and forth a couple more rounds. My hands were shaking. Soon, we got the challenges I wouldn't do. I started playing an O. Seti always played yes. She was gaining points, and didn't challenge me on the rare times I drew something I felt I could do. And then, as we were approaching the 10th round that would end the game, Seti drew a combination that made my breath catch. Would you skin yourself to win this game? Seti was already ahead. If I didn't challenge her, she'd win. If I challenged her and she refused, she'd lose. The smart play here would be to pick no. She wouldn't risk anything, she was way ahead of me anyway. The game would end on the next turn. All she had to do was miss 1 point by playing her no card. Playing yes was something only a complete idiot would do. But Seti had never played no, not in any of the turns we'd had so far. Would she now? Seti looked me in the eye as she put down her card. Smiled almost apologetically, with a little shrug. Oh, how that smile infuriated me. The lightness of it. The willingness to throw everything down in this stupid, idiotic, foolish game. When she was already guaranteed to win. I played my card. We flipped them over, yes. Fury coursed through me. It was like when we were kids all over again, and Seti would brazenly claim she'd do something outrageous, when all of us knew she really wouldn't. When she'd bluff, and I'd call her on it. And the words spat from my lips before I could think to stop it, because how dare she mock me like this, playing like her life hardly mattered, challenge. It was strange, the expressions that flickered across Seti's face. Regret. Fear. Angst. Rage. For just a moment, she reminded me of that little girl again. The little girl who idolized me, who just wanted to be brave enough to impress me, until I called her out for going too far. And, every single time, she forced herself to rise to my challenge. Remembering that, I suddenly regretted my actions. Seti's eyelids closed, fluttering, as if she were coming to terms with what had just happened. Then, without a word, she rose to her feet. My parents did a lot of barbecuing in the summers, even the occasional pig roast or carving up venison. I wondered with horror if among the many implements in this grandly furnished house, they might have a skinning knife. "Seti, wait!" I cried, seizing her arm as she turned away. "I forfeit. You hear me? I forfeit. You win. I withdraw my challenge." "WWWW what?" she stammered. "You can't forfeit. That's not how it works." "Too bad. I'm done." "Toby," she shrieked as I grabbed my jacket and rushed for the door. "You agreed to finish the game." "Yeah? Bite me." I ducked out and slammed the door. From inside, a howl of anguish. "Hi. Keening. Practically inhuman. God, Seti could be so scary." I hurried away, trying to force the horrible stupid game from my consciousness. Trying to forget how irrational Seti could be. My phone buzzed. "Seti, hey! Seti, we're not finished. Seti, we have one turn left. Seti, Toby. Seti, one turn." She carried on like that all night. I silenced my phone. In the morning, I had so many messages I blocked her. I fully expected calls from our parents, Jules, our mutual acquaintances. Email. Messenger. Voicemails at work. Maybe a singing fucking telegram. Seti had a huge network, and I knew my sister had 1,000 ways to contact me. There would be no escaping her wrath until the game was over. And yet, silence. Not so much as a peep. It was this complete absence of communication that unsettled me more than anything. I called our parents, Jules, friends, but they hadn't heard from Seti. Not wanting them to worry, I lied to everyone and said I was just checking in because it had been a while. With every hour, the knot of dread in my gut tightened. Finally, 3 days after our fateful game, there came a knock at my door. I'd been in a state of suspension so long that my first feeling was relief. At last, we'd get this over with. I went to the door, calling out, "Who's there?" to no response. I peeked through the peephole, but it was covered. Sigh. Just like Seti to play games. Maybe it really was a singing telegram. I opened the door. "Hell." The word died on my lips, shifting from hello to hell in what, looking back, seems chillingly appropriate. On the threshold stood a costume figure. She was reminiscent of the Easter Bunny, huge black eyes, plush fur around chipmunkish cheeks, buck teeth, and mauve fur with a fluffy white belly. This wasn't sophisticated like a cosplay fursona. No, this was more the mall-grade Easter variety, vaguely creepy and unsettling, like a costume theme park character or a Chuck E. Cheese animatronic. I'd always had a dread of such characters, even as a child. Something about the fakery of the costuming was so off-putting. Now, that same unease prickled through me as the bunny spread its arms in a ta-da pose. I said. I stepped back and held open the door, trying to ignore the small voice that wondered what I might see if I lifted the mask off that bunny suit. The bunny strolled in with an exaggerated happy stride, reminding me, again, of a costumed character. Who could ever tell what was underneath such a suit? The bunny pulled out 2 chairs from my dining table and patted one for me. "Seti?" I said. The bunny pulled a card from a pocket somewhere in its fur and held it up for me to read. "One more turn." "How do I know it's you?" "Take off that dumb thing." A head shake. The bunny pointed again to the card, exaggeratedly tapping it and nodding to me. Its suit smelled faintly of copper, and maybe something else. Sweat? Body odor? No, it was more unpleasant than that. Like the smell of a dead mouse I'd found once in a trap, rotting for days. And I wondered, what was under that suit? She wouldn't have done it, would she? She couldn't have and survived. This had to be an act. To make me fret, think that she'd done something crazy. I looked into those bunny eyes. Black mesh. I thought I could just glimpse the whites of her eyes, a faint gleam as she looked out at me. Again that coppery smell. And as we both sat at the coffee table there was, I could see, very clearly now, blood, dripping from the suit of the bunny. A faint dribble of it. How badly was she bleeding in there? Or was it all an act? Would she even be bleeding still? Would blood really drip through the costume? God, Seti. Fine. I'll play the last turn. And if I win, you'll take off that suit and you'll be just fine underneath, all right? Deal? You'll be whole and fine. The bunny made a sound in the affirmative. It was Seti's voice, but sounded wrong, like the vocal cords were somehow deteriorated. It reached into a pocket somewhere in the suit, handed me the would you cards. My turn. Hands shaking, I shuffled. I could see now a couple of places where the mauve fur was darker, wet with stains. But it can't be real, I thought. No way it can be real. I swallowed the bile in my throat and dealt the cards. Would you? My hands trembled as I turned each one. Disappear. Yourself. 2. Win. This game. Fuck. Disappear? Did that mean die? End my life? Or, like, witness protection disappear? The meaning was unclear. But I couldn't pick an O, or Seti would win. And somehow I knew what would happen if she won, that she would lift off her mask and underneath there would be. Shuddering, I pushed forward my card, and the bunny pushed forward hers. And we flipped, yes. The bunny spoke. One word. I tried not to imagine its skinless tongue-slurring, scallenge. My heart quickened. Fine, I said. You, Mom, Dad, Jules, everyone we know, you'll never see me again. The rest of my life. No matter how hard you look or how you spend your resources to come after me, I will not be found. I'll be gone. And when I am, I'll have won the game. As I spoke, I felt the air shiver between us. It was as if something had ripped my words in my soul. And I knew, as deeply and suddenly and surely as I knew my own name, that I would disappear so thoroughly I would effectively cease to exist. Somehow, I was incredibly calm about all this. Goodbye, Seti. I turned and grabbed my bag and walked out. I drove to our parents' house to tell them that I loved them. They were extraordinarily perplexed when I greeted them each with a tight embrace, and even more so when I begged them to please look after Seti for me. I just hoped it was enough to save my sister. That whatever was under that suit was all part of the drama to draw me in, and everything would return to normal after the game. I just had to disappear. Who, said Dad. He was a bit hard of hearing. Seti, September, I told him. What's happening in September? Asked Mom. No, Mom, I'm talking about Set. I stopped, staring at the mantle. A few days ago, I'd been here playing with Seti, and the photos on the mantle had been the same vacation trips as always, goofy images of Seti, me, and Jules playing as children. But now, I was looking at the exact same photos, and it was only me and Jules. Mom, meanwhile, nudged Dad and murmured, Sweetie, remember how Toby used to pretend to have a little sister? Oh gosh, that's right. Dad brightened and turned to me. And whenever you did something bad, you'd blame it on September. But I was already out the door, rushing back to the game. I declared I would disappear. From the present moment on, I'd be gone. But Seti. I checked my phone, my email, messages. But there were no photographs, no texts, no social media evidence my sister had ever existed, present or past. I called Jules, but she said the same thing as our parents, that Seti was the imaginary little sister I made up to blame for the worst outcomes of a childhood game. A game I designed, a game for which I am the guarantor, a game I have been hosting among various groups and players for the past few years. And when I at last got home and rushed inside, the bunny was no longer at the table, but the cards were still laid out, a note scrawled beside them on a bloody napkin. Double dare. People still contact me asking why I ended the game. The truth is... well... the truth is the napkin, the only proof of Seti, written in her own distinctive handwriting, disintegrated with time. And I'm not even sure myself what I believe anymore. But I'll tell you this. If anyone ever offers to play the would you game, no matter what the prize, do not do it. It's not worth it. Learn from my mistakes. And never, ever play the would you game.